Hey, you looking for that next new video of the penny floor that's completely done and is done in fast forward so you can see how quick it goes? This isn't it. This is the video of a floor in progress, and I've gone over every hurdle and I've dealt with anything, so I'm telling you all the tips and tricks that I can think of to help you with your project. Now, first and foremost, you got to realize whatever you're doing, it's at the end of the day, it's going to look wonderful, but it's also an artistic endeavor. So there's going to be imperfections and mistakes and all that. You might know some, no one else is, so don't sweat it. It's you just got to grade on a curve and realize it'll come out great in the end. So this is my work in progress. This is a bathroom being completely remodeled, head to toe, walls, countertops, everything. I already did a penny sink. That actually looks pretty cool, and closet and the like. So I am going to tell you everything I think you need to know to help you with your project, because you're going to have issues that come along, and I would like to help you with them, so in turn you don't make some of the mistakes I did. So let's basically start with, you're starting from scratch. Now, what I did is I have a tile floor here, white tile floor, and my first initial thought was that I was going to basically glue the pennies on the tile floor. I did not want to grout. So what I did is I used this Rust-Oleum heavy-duty black paint, okay, with the intention so I would have a dark background between my pennies. Now, if you're doing a countertop or something like that, that would probably work fine, because you'll see some videos where people have grouted between their pennies, and you'll see some videos where people have not. They've just had a black base, and then in turn they put on their clear coat. In regards to materials you're using to seal your pennies, basically you have epoxy or polyurethane. So countertops and such, you can, to me, I think you're probably okay using a polyurethane type product, but for things such as floors, you really have to use an epoxy type product. It's a little bit more durable, more bulletproof. Okay. This is why you need to grout between your pennies, because in regards to the epoxy, the clear epoxy is very expensive. And so what I found is I have to buy at least $200 worth of epoxy. So even though I painted my floor black between the pennies, I am going to go ahead and put down a non-sanded grout between the pennies, because each layer of epoxy I'm putting down is about the same thickness of a penny, and so that way I can save money on epoxy material, which would otherwise go between the pennies. The other thing why you want to consider grouting between your pennies is because air can get in underneath the penny if you are just putting a penny on a painted surface, and then those air bubbles then in turn will release, and then you will see those air bubbles kind of come up your epoxy. So that's the big reason. So starting with that, I'm going to grout, and you're seeing the stage of me cleaning the floor, and I'm going to grout and then do my final epoxy. So we come down here, basically everything's glued down. Now, as far as types of material to glue down the pennies, I went ahead and used super glue. I predominantly use super glue gel. This is regular super glue, but I used that because when I investigated some of the white glues, because this is in a bathroom, some of the white glues that people were using elsewhere, when I read information on them, if they were exposed to moisture, they could reliquefy. So I didn't want them to reliquefy and then have a cloudy glue basically reliquefy, and then you see it under the sealed surface. So I went ahead with the super glue gel. I bought it at Harbor Freight. It's really cheap. I bought them in big blister packs. What I like about it is that the gel allowed me to move the penny where I wanted to, and it would cure up fairly quick. lot of precision, and it even came in handy, especially even when I was doing my penny sink as well. I did see another video with a gentleman in London that basically used clear silicone. That looked really interesting. That looks like that was probably doable too. It would probably be cheaper, although you would want to make sure that you were running a really thin bead, because between the pennies it's going to mash up, and you don't want the silicone coming up past your surface. So all the pennies are glued down, and in regards to, come over here, you look at these edges. I'll take that for a second. You look at these edges. What I went ahead and done is I had moved the baseboard. Before you move your baseboard, you want to score it with a razor blade so it doesn't then peel up the drywall and the paint. And I removed the baseboard. Baseboard's cheap to replace, so it makes sense to go ahead and remove it. And then also it gives you a cleaner edge, because then you can do your floor up to that edge, and then put down a new piece of baseboard. It just looks more professional. Now, what I did is I went ahead and I put some clear caulking in here and let it dry, and brought it up to the surface that I was gluing my pennies to, because you don't want a lot of your expensive epoxy basically going in there into that joint, because it's very expensive again, and you'll lose a lot of material because it's self-leveling. So that's something you need to consider. In regards to this being a bathroom, basically when I pour the material, I basically have a soda cup in here, which will effectively block off the hole for the toilet drain, and of course I'll replace that wax seal. Also, something you need to think about in regards to your edge is that, and this is an old house, it's 60 years old, the process of wear and tear, you're going to get scuffs and scrapes and all that. Now, you're going to be building up your surface, so if you have any scuffs towards the bottom of your wall or molding or door casing, go ahead and touch up that paint now, because obviously if you have scuffs there and then you put your epoxy on, you could then have a scuff buried underneath the epoxy, and it's trapped there forever. So that's something to think about. In regards to where you start, I used a metal straight edge, not wood, metal, because you can draw a straight line, you can have a piece of tape. If you have any type of variation as your project goes on, you're going to notice more of a change. So if you're not completely straight, then it basically starts to kind of build more of an arc and a curve and all that. Still going to look good, but that's why I wanted to make sure that I started with a completely straight edge. Also, make sure that you only work one direction constantly, because if you get ADD and then you start from another direction, or have a friend start from another side and you think you're going to meet in the middle, there's enough variation of it where you're going to end up at some point meeting somewhere where you're going to have a weird gap, or a place where you can't put a penny because it's too thin, or what have you. So continuity wise, you want to make sure you're working from one side constantly. Also, a good trick that I used was as you're trying to make sure that you have continuity amongst the lines, what I did was you're working with improper surfaces that have imperfections. So even if your line's perfectly straight or what have you, and you're perfectly gluing everything together, even if you have a little bit of an arc or pit or valley, things are going to change up. So if I had a continuity issue where I couldn't get a good interlocking penny from one to the next, you can go ahead and every now and then throw a dime in to get your continuity back on track, so your peaks and your valleys all line up. So that's a good trick to utilize as well. As far as before you put down your epoxy, you want to make sure you dust vacuum over and over again, and then also wipe down the walls and stuff like that, see if there's any residual dust and all that, because you don't want that ending up in your clear coat. Also, you also need to think about the fact that you're working with dissimilar materials. So if you're gluing your pennies down, in a lot of cases you may be using a water type based glue. That's not compatible per se with an epoxy. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that whatever materials you're using, be it epoxy or glue, whatever, that they are totally cured before you put on the next product. Because if you have, say, a water-based product that isn't completely cured, then you put on epoxy, that moisture in that water-based product is all going to still try to cure and bleed off and all that, and then what it can do is it can cause a chemical reaction. If you've heard of the term alligatoring, that's basically when a surface you paint or something like that, and then it looks all cracked and stuff like that. So you want to make sure that everything you're working with is completely cured before you move on to the next product. Also, as far as weird corners and stuff like that, another thing I did, so you have a place where you can't put a penny. I use nail polish, and there's a couple places where I painted in a penny where I didn't have a full penny, or in some cases where I couldn't use a full penny, so I didn't have to cut a penny. I grabbed a washer and then cut the washer and made like a slice if I only needed a slice, and then I painted it copper, and then visually it blended in. So I have like 3 or 4 different colors of copper nail polish. So if I need to do a corner that has an imperfection, I can paint it in, the circle, the penny-sized circle, or paint a washer, or if I've thrown down a dime to get my continuity back on track, it's worked great for that. Also, if you find that for some reason you're getting a big or a more noticeable gap between the pennies, you can use a very small detail brush and paint in a little bit more of an edge around the outside of the penny to take away from the contrast between the penny and either your painted background or your black ground or whatever. So you can do some tricks like that to make that contrasting void look less noticeable. Also, I've seen some videos where people are using they're building penny squares, and they're using like a picture frame to build those squares, and they're putting them on like contact paper and then laying them down. I tried that. I don't like that because your surface for that to work out right, in my experience, your surface has to be 100% perfect. And if you slightly tweak anything, or if you have a hump in your concrete floor or whatever, then it all loses continuity. And every floor is imperfect, and when you're lining up one penny next to the other, even if there's a little bit of imperfection, it doesn't stick out. But now if you have an 8.5 by 11 sheet, you think about it like a Lego. It's got to lock in perfectly with the piece next to it, and if it doesn't, then it makes more of a void. So to kind of demonstrate that, even if you're off like the slightest width like a penny, after a matter of rows, it starts to create a real void, and then you have then you have a problem, because you got to figure out how am I going to bridge the gap. So what I did is here, just to kind of show an example, is this is just regular copy paper, but if you see, it starts out perfect here, and there's a void here in our first section, basically the width of a penny,
and by the time you get out to 4 feet, you got a serious void. And so that's why I'm not a big fan of the big sheets, because then I've also seen them where they get a little bit twisted, and then you visually start to notice all the big differences. I'm kind of running out of my hacks there. Only other thing I can think about telling you is when you're going from one surface to the next, this floor, the floor next to it is a bamboo floor, and so I've got to create essentially a dike to make sure the epoxy floor does not go into the next room. So if you just shine down here, or yeah, point down here. Basically, I'm going to build this up with basically a clay, and build up a clay dike, so the material can come up to that and dry, and then I'll peel out the clay. So I'll use a non-hardening clay for that. And then once it's dry, then I'll pull out the non-hardening clay. So those are the hacks I think that I've thought of so far that I think can help you. You'll be fine. You'll do a good job. These are some of the tricks I've figured out so far. And when my final floor is done, I'll go ahead and post it. And also the other thing is it takes a very long time to do this. So keep that in mind. It's not a quick project. So that's all I have. Thanks. Talk to you later. Bye.